All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April School Board meeting. And the meeting is now called to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mrs. Hobbs, could we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Kraus?
Here.
Mr. Everett?
Here.
Mr. Fee?
Here.
Mr. Hollaba?
Here.
Mrs. Janzik? Mr. Lady?
Here.
Mr. Lindsay?
He is excused. He was called into work.
Mr. Ratowski?
Present.
Mr. Wilson?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, the first item on our agenda is recognition of a delegation. I would like to read a, excuse me, a certificate. Certificate of recognition. Resolution of the Board of Directors of the Upper Adams School District to honor Levi Haynes. Whereas the Board of School Directors of the Upper Adams School District commends you for your achievement of your Pennsylvania State Championship in wrestling and your 100th career win. Whereas your diligence, skill, and performance being exemplary have brought honor to you, the school district, and the community. Now therefore be it resolved that this board does hereby extend congratulations and commendations to Levi Haynes, signed this 20th day of April 2021, Wesley Dahl, Superintendent, and my signature as the President of the Board. So I see Amy Hayes is,
Yeah, I'm here.
oh, there you are, right next to it. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations. Do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for allowing us to have a season and just always supporting the wrestling team. I'm very thankful for the opportunity and look forward to the future and representing the black and gold for another year. I'm very excited and appreciate everything you guys do for us.
Well, congratulations. And Mrs. Haynes, would you like to say a few words too?
We really are just very excited that Levi did have this opportunity, and we thank the school board and all our community members for the support that you've given to him.
Well, great. And Mr. Haynes is on here somewhere too, I'm told. Still looking, but I don't see him. Ken's iPhone. Would you like to say a couple of words? You're muted.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Great. Again, same thing. I just want to thank everybody who worked so hard. Coach Graham and everybody with the administration and board that was able to make a season for all the winter sports athletes and your hard work that went into that. And we're just very appreciative of all that work that you did do. Thank you.
Well, congratulations again, Levi, to you and to the entire Haynes family.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't have anybody who has offered public comments, so we'll move on to correspondence. And I have a letter I'd like to briefly read. It's from the Upper Adams Lions Club. The Upper Adams Lions Club has historically reserved March as our Staff Appreciation Month. In the past, pre-COVID, we hosted a dinner. This gave our club the opportunity to show how much we value all the staff members of the Upper Adams School District. Since we were unable to have such an event this year, we looked for an alternative way to express our thanks to others, like ourselves, who serve our community. This note is to inform you of the exceptional job several teachers did in presenting a wonderful program for our Lions Club. Biglerville Elementary teachers, led by Colleen Riebert, shared with us the challenges of virtual learning and some strategies they have employed to keep their students engaged in learning throughout this difficult year. Ms. Riebert, accompanied by Kelly Pelk, Kelly Dutro, and Sean Hedges, I hope I pronounced that correctly, went above and beyond to explain these issues to us. They really educated our club members, many of whom no longer have students in school. Their presentation was professional, informative, and well done. We could tell by their enthusiasm how dedicated they are to their students. Please know how proud we are to have had this opportunity with such exceptional teachers. Sincerely, Elizabeth Fair, President, Upper Adams Lions Club. So congratulations to the teachers who made this presentation to the club. And thank you very much to the Lions for acknowledging that in this letter. All right, we move on to reports. And the first is a legislative report, Dr. Fee.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also want to say thank you for not making me go directly after Levi, which there would be, it's kind of painful to listen to these reports, and he's such a great kid, and did such great things. I'm sorry to even to have to speak at all. You'll all be pleased to hear that. Listen, I will not take up too much time because the report is available. And for those of you playing at home, it's Candy is very nice about making sure that it's all available. In any case, I do want to bring up one or two things. One is for those of you who have paid attention and not fallen asleep immediately during my legislative reports of the last however many years. I do want to point out that the PSERS, the problem with the retirement system, which is no fault of the teachers, of course, but is a major problem that's kind of been back engineered by the legislature. There was a real update on this just last night. And what happened was that PSERS board voted 12-1 to revise the investment returns. And what that meant was all of a sudden, teachers who would not have contractually had to contribute more into the pension fund would have to. I will point out that there was a lone dissenting voice, and that was from Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Pat Brown, who made the point that current state law does not allow the board to rectify employee contribution rates after the fact, suggesting that the higher rates will not take effect if the legislature does not act. The problem with all of this is we don't know how much money really is involved, and it may, in fact, end up falling on taxpayers to make up whatever shortfall there is. I'm not claiming to understand this. The story came into my inbox. I did as much research as I could this afternoon. I put it in my report. Those of you who understand it better, feel free to jump right in. But I do want to point out that this is an issue that could have a financial impact on many districts throughout the Commonwealth. And it is just a kind of a constant issue with this, the way that the retirement system is structured. And again, it has nothing to do with the teachers themselves. They certainly deserve to have a good retirement system in place. I do want to say before I sign off, I also have a footnote in there for Mr. Stump because in my last report, I made it sound like Chuck Stump didn't pay attention to every word I wrote, and that's absolutely untrue. I don't want to say he's my biggest fan, that's unfair to him, but he certainly is a very active citizen who pays attention to these issues and always wants to speak on them, and is remarkably consistent in what he does have to say. So whether I agree with the guy or not, I have a lot of respect for him. A couple other items on there that might be of interest in general would be that there is a tax credit proposal introduced in House Bill 602 for career and technical education tax credit, which the PSBA, the Pennsylvania School Board Association, which I refer to lovingly as Uncle Pisba, is very much in favor of this. It would provide tax credits to businesses that contribute to career and technical partnership organizations. And that does seem like a great idea. So there are some links in all of these if you want to do your own research. I try to give you, insofar as it's possible for me to do so, links to the primary materials, by which I mean if it's a bill, I try to have a link directly to that bill so you can read it for yourself, and any good journalistic reporting on this. There are a couple of other items. The House passed legislation to provide temporary grant immunity from COVID-19 from what would be spurious lawsuits. I hope Mr. McQuaid won't take issue with me for using that term, but meaning lawsuits without a lot of merit. So that is of interest as well. There are new recommendations from PDE on school reopening. This doesn't have an immediate effect on us, I don't think, right now. We've worked very hard to stay within the existing guidelines, and I don't think that changed for us when the system changed on the 12th of April. Let me see. And then the other couple of items, there are items of interest for members of the board who might want some further education relative to web-based policy systems. I think of you, Mr. Everett, when I think of that. But also the spring legal roundup might be of interest as well. I do want to say the PD has announced, by which I mean the Pennsylvania Department of Education, I'm sorry, there are so many acronyms, has announced a project to provide broadband internet access through libraries. Again, this seems like a slam dunk good idea. But all of the links and various stories involved are available for your perusal. So I hope I didn't take up too much time there, Mr. President. Are there any questions about any of that?
Thank you, Dr. Fee. Hearing no questions or comments, we'll move on. Mr. Ratowski, FRN.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. So coming from the National School Board Association's Federal Relations Network, FRN, I have the federal report here. So President Biden released what's called a skinny budget, which is basically a pared down budget, but in the upcoming month or two, we're expected for a more comprehensive budget. In regards to the preliminary budget, though, President Biden proposed a 102.8 billion funds for the U.S. Department of Education, which is an increase of 41%. And this is an expected increase of 121%, which ranges or comes down to about $36.5 billion in funding for Title I, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act. I did put some links in there for your reading and a link to the press briefing as well. Also, President Biden also released an infrastructure plan, which usually is not something worth our concern, but in this case, the plan includes $100 billion for new school construction and existing upgrades, as well as additional funds to expand broadband internet access across the country as well. And then we have a comprehensive review of Title IX was launched by the Department of Education. This review is a in part due to President Biden's request that there be some substantial review that takes place in terms of the 1972 educational amendment, and that's prohibiting sex-based discrimination in any school or other education program that receives money. And then I believe we have talked about this in the past, but the Department of Education did release an updated roadmap. So earlier last year, Volume 1 was released, and then more recently, Volume 2 was released. And the plan basically adjusts the guidelines for social distancing for younger children to 3 feet. And really, it's helping to reopen schools. I think Upper Adams School District, it's very notable that we have done an excellent job in terms of getting our kids into school early. We were able to do this successfully in the fall and have been successful this year as well. So I want to commend our district in terms of across the nation. We have done a good job and are really a model, I believe. And then lastly, I did skip over the Pfizer vaccination. This is not necessarily a legislative issue, but it is notable just in terms of the national news. So Pfizer did request clearance to begin vaccinations for 12 to 15-year-old children. This, of course, affects our school district and school districts across the country. So FDA is looking to that, and I posted a couple links there for your reference as well. At the bottom of the report, I did post some legislative highlights. So these are just bills that I spotted, and as we progress through, I'm not going to talk about them today unless something comes up more noticeable and there's some action, but these are some bills that we may want to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rutowski. Very thorough. Any questions or comments on the report? Hearing none, we'll move on. Dr. Dahl, LIU. You're muted.
Thank you and good evening. Just a few highlights, which I think you already have in front of you regarding the May 6th LIU meeting. And there were a few things of interest. If you look down through the items, a few things I'd like to bring to your attention. Smith, Elliott, Kearns and Company did present the audit report of fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020, and that audit report was accepted at the last board meeting at the IU. Crabtree, Rohrbaugh and Associates are currently looking at bids for their proposed construction at the IU regarding the implementation of a health center. I haven't heard anything recently about any updates, so I'll try to get some more information on that. And they're also looking at some of the renovations for the main entrance at the central office and York Learning Centers. Down below, there is an election ballot for the spring 2021 Board of Directors. And it looks like they have been busy, just like us, on a number of board policies. They have 6 board policies that they had recently revised, and they are also busy at job description revisions. They did 8 of those last month. The next meeting will be held on May the 4th, 2021 at 7 p.m. That's a list of the highlights.
Thank you, Dr. Dahl. Any questions or comments? We will be discussing later on the LIU board member. I have a copy of the ballot, which I think each of you has, and we'll discuss that later on in this evening's agenda. So we'll move on to federal programs. Dr. Corwell and Mr. Albin.
Good evening. I just wanted to mention under Title III that testing is now completed for the ESL students. Teachers did a tremendous job getting everybody assessed. We actually did really well with numbers because the testing window was a little bit wider. We were able to get more students in who had been out of the country and have come back to Pennsylvania in order to be tested. So we're very happy with that. We're planning a summer ESL day with the teachers, and two important things we're going to be working on are the new curricular guidelines for EL students. And also we're going to be working on coming up with strategies for outreach of our families, getting them back into the school building. We've had a year with them not being here. So we are going to be brainstorming ways of getting our families back here for next year. In regard to the allocations for funding for next year, right now we haven't heard what any amounts are at this time, unless Mr. Albin has any updates that I'm not aware of. So I will let Mr. Albin talk about the other title areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Corwell. Any questions or comments for her? Okay, Mr. Albin.
Yes, good evening, everyone. 2 points this evening in regards to titles 1, 2, and 4. The first is the Department of Federal Programs and the Pennsylvania Association of Federal Programs Coordinators are still going to hold their annual PAFPC conference, and I'll be attending that virtually May 3rd through 5th. That's a very important conference that I attend each year because we get the lay of the land, so to speak, as far as what we can consider funding, any differences in applying for the grants for the upcoming year, which usually take place late May and June, and any changes just with any federal requirements or limitations as we look for expenditures. So I'm looking forward to attending that. As Dr. Corwell shared, we're not sure on allocations at this point. Hopefully I'll get more information at the conference. I know Mrs. Hobbs will be speaking this evening in regards to some federal dollars and perhaps some impacts that the federal government is looking at that could impact what we're going to be getting in Title I. But again, that's all speculation at this point. So that's more of a wait and see game. The second point we have wrapped up our after school program, which we do annually at Biglerville Elementary for our Title I students and low achieving reading remediation folks there. So that was a big hit as usual. And we're always excited to offer that after school program. And we're even in discussions on how we potentially could offer more after school programs with the ESSER funds to close that achievement gap that we might see due to the pandemic. So I know it's been an exciting conversation. Mrs. Hobbs, Dr. Dahl, and principals will be having here upcoming and how to meet those needs of our students better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albin. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Albin? Hearing none, we'll move on to Cumberland Perry. Mrs. Kraus.
We did not have a meeting in March, so I have no report for Cumberland Perry. There is a link to the newsletter that was sent out recently by Cumberland Perry in case any of you would like to look at that. As far as the Canner funds, we are currently accepting applications for classroom grants. The deadline for them is May 3rd, and the link was just sent out again to the staff last week. That's my report for Canner funds.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Kraus? If you haven't had the opportunity to look at this newsletter from Cumberland Perry, I would invite you to spend a few minutes looking it over. It runs the gamut from construction to diesel technology through nursing. And at the not the very end, but toward the bottom, there's an article on a retired Navy captain who went to Cumberland Perry back in the 70s, I think. And he eventually rose to be the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier. And so when he started his Navy career out as an airplane mechanic, So Cumberland Perry is a good start for lots of different things in life. I'm a big proponent of it, and I would invite you to take a look at that. Hearing no other questions or comments, and that was for, you say no report for Cantor funds, correct? Okay. So we'll move on to administrative reports. Anyone have questions or comments for any of the administrators? You're muted. I still don't hear you. But Cindy.
I just have a few.
Okay.
As far as Mrs. Graham, I just really want to commend you for all the work, and all the teachers, for that matter, all of the entire district, our faculty have just done a fantastic job this year, and I can't underscore that enough. But as many of your reports, including Mrs. Graham's, outline various accomplishments that the young people are doing, I just think it's just so exciting. And also how many students have been accepted at colleges. Thank you so much for putting that in here. It's just so inspirational, and I really appreciate that. I also had a comment for Dr. Corwell. Just a real congratulations, high five for the two students who have completed the Edgenuity at home, and I can imagine what an accomplishment that is. And I'm just really excited about the future that we've played a role in helping them prepare for. So thank you.
Anyone else? Well, I'd like to echo what Mrs. Janzik just said. When you read these reports in the aggregate, we have students at all levels who are achieving across the full spectrum of art, sports, acceptance at colleges, et cetera, et cetera. And it really is a credit to not only the students and their families, but the teachers and the administrators who are supporting them. I just got done speaking a few minutes ago about my support of the Cumberland Perry, and Mrs. Graham lists universities and post-secondary technical training that run the gamut from Ivy League universities to York Technical Institute. So we speak often about having graduates who are career and college ready. And here we see tangible proof that we're meeting that. And so I echo Mrs. Janzik in congratulating everyone on the staff here for what they're doing, as well as the students and their families. Okay. We move on to superintendent's report, Dr. Dull.
Thank you. Just a few items, and I believe everyone has the administrative report. There are two actual reports that I have this evening, and the second one I will share verbally, just go through the highlights and actually post this on our website tomorrow. Mrs. Bressman has that, and we will post that. The first report outlines a number of things. I just want to share a couple highlights from that. One item that is not on the report that I do want to share, we were recently contacted through a number of people who are doing some studies through the U.S. Department of Education, and there was a pretty significant grant that was provided to some research entities to take a look at after-school programs and study those programs. We currently and have been working with Collaboration for Youth for a number of years, and they do provide after-school programs within our school district, as well as a number of neighboring districts as well throughout our county and York County and neighboring counties. part of this study, they do want to look at how they can improve programs. So that's the main focus of it. And Collaboration for Youth was on a call recently with us to share about the study coming up. I just wanted to inform the group here about this study that will be taking place. Information and data that is gathered through that study. There is already a consent form that parents that send students to that program can sign. And much of the data is very similar that they will be gathering from what parents have already consented to. But Children and Youth, or Collaboration for Youth, I should say. Collaboration for Youth is currently looking at that consent form just to make sure that it aligns with the information that the study is looking for. So this is something I just wanted to just bring to your attention. The other piece is COVID, the COVID pandemic planning with the Upper Adams School District. I placed, without going through things in great detail, I placed some of the statistics from last month in March and compared that to April. So it's no surprise that when you're looking at the statistics that we've been seeing throughout the county, that also mirrors what we're seeing within our schools. And you can see that through the cases where we didn't have cases in March that we are now having in April as of last week. As you will look down below, I did share some of the other information, and I know that President Wilson has been looking at this quite extensively from week to week. Back in February and March, it looked pretty promising that we were moving back into moderate, but over the last several weeks, we have still been in a substantial and actually had been moving up in numbers and fluctuating back and forth. For those reasons, and also looking at the remaining days of school, I think we have about 31 days of school remaining. Looking at making any kind of change at this point in the school year, I believe would have a negative effect on the current schedules that students have. Looking at the schedules that we have in place at our high school, we're currently in a rigorous testing mode with PSSAs. We just learned that ESL students are being tested as well. PASA students are being tested. We also have AB courses happening as well. A number of our students have adjusted their schedules to actually work as well to make money for either themselves or college, et cetera. So my recommendation for the remainder of this year is to maintain the current schedules that we have at the secondary campus. And we are currently full-time and have been full-time at K through 6 since August the 25th or 26th of this past year, I think the 25th. So as was mentioned earlier, we have been trying to stay open the best that we can. We feel that the plan that we have in place has been working. In the report, I have placed some data points as far as how many closures we have had since the beginning of the school year on August the 26th, and how that looks by building. And I believe with the hybrid schedule that we're currently utilizing, we are able to maintain and stay open where a number of other districts have been closing. So my recommendation would be to continue as we are this year and then regroup, see what is happening and what is being recommended over the summer, and then start our planning for next school year during the summer. I just listed some other information. We do have the calendar that we are looking to approve this evening. The only change that we did make to that, I think, was a snow day. There was a recommendation that came as we took it back to teachers a second time, switching the order of our snow days. So I think the third and fourth day were just flip-flop, but that is the only change since we had originally sent that out for the group to look at, as well as looking at the changes in when parent conferences happen at the elementary level. Didn't know if there were any questions on any of the other items before I go into the second report that are listed on the administrative report.
I'm just curious, Wes, if there's any feedback coming from PDE with regard to reopening in the fall? I mean, are we
Yeah.
going to be looking at the very same criteria, or will that fall on the shoulders of each district and each school board? Or when do we expect to have some feedback and direction there?
That's a great question. And I continue to ask, and I think all of us are continuing to keep that at the forefront of our planning and trying to consider what options might be coming to us. I'm very hopeful that we would be able to open with more students coming back. Having the secondary campus where we share similar sections of our building throughout the day makes it extremely challenging. So we would have to look at rescheduling or looking at creative scheduling in order to bring more students back if we have to continue like we are now. It's just not physically possible to do that right now with the staff numbers that we have and the current schedules that we have in place. It just doesn't make any sense to change that, but we will continue to monitor that. That is a question I know that all of us as district leaders are, very anxious to hear and get feedback. And I'm hoping that that comes before 2 weeks before school starts. Like sometimes the information tends to come to us at that last minute, but I'm hopeful that we would be able to.
I think our goal should be to open up fully pre-COVID and make that the default position, that if we receive guidance that says we can't, then we move from that to whatever the guidance is. But let's hope for the best and plan for the worst.
The second report I would like to give is just an update on our anti-racism plan, the progress and the updates. We have held our second training with Laura McCusker from the IU. That was held on April the 9th, and we did have to postpone the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, the unconscious bias training. That was postponed until the end of this month. So once we have that confirmed, we will be notifying our staff about that training. That is already set for a date of training with the IU, but we may flip-flop that with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. So we are working on that. I did reach out recently, and Mrs. Graham and I met with some of our local pastors and Father Mitzel. So we met with Pastor Siebert from Trinity Lutheran Church in Arnsville. We also met with Father Mitzel just to have some conversations about some of the recent events that are happening within our district and to get some feedback. I will remind everyone that the first phase of our plan is posted on our webpage, and there's only been some minor revisions to that. As we work through and get more data and direction, we will change and add to that plan. The comprehensive plan is in the process of being worked on, and we would like to take a look at that plan a little bit more closely. On the agenda this evening, we do see a request to add some additional services from our intermediate unit with some of the staff there to help us build that solid foundation for our comprehensive plan and integrate a lot of the data points and the feedback that we're getting right now from surveys and different types of audits and recommendations that are coming to us. We feel that if we do the work now, we put things into place, we will be able to sustain this over time, which is, the key point of what we would like to do with our planning efforts. The equity audit and schools climate surveys, I believe there is a meeting tomorrow to continue that planning, and that will actually take place. The school climate surveys are scheduled to take place in May. And then the equity audit will also take a look at that and review this data in June. And then Mr. Albin is working on the charge of a subcommittee to take a look at the Upper Adams School District educational equity policy. It's a new policy that came out from the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. And there is a recommendation that we take our time and tailor it to the district. So we want to take a look at data points that we gather through climate surveys before we actually create a policy. So Mr. Robin is going to get a cross-section of different people within our community, some people of color, also some people within our community, a variety of representatives such as teachers, administrators, community members, to help collaborate and design that policy. And then they in turn will present that to the policy committee to consider, and then eventually it will come to the full board for your review and comment. We continue to try to provide as many communications as possible on different things that are happening. There will be a second article. It was just submitted to the Gettysburg Times this week that you will see in the very near future. We continue to focus on social media and trying to post some of the things that are happening within our district. And we are also monitoring costs associated with all the things that we're doing related to this plan. And we will continue to outline those costs. And I have outlined them by month and by vendor in the report that we will make public in the very, very near future tomorrow. We did recently receive a generous monetary donation by Peter and Gail Hall. And I just wanted to thank them for considering us, as they had provided us a very generous monetary donation to take care of any efforts in addressing social and racial justice. We did, and we do know what some of the costs will be associated with the Fox Rothschild report, and those are listed under May. And those are for 3 separate months at the a little bit over $30,000. And this past month in April, and this would include the potential of adding the comprehensive plan piece at $3,000, would be in April. The total charges that we have received related are around a little over $16,500. Are there any questions?
All right, hearing no questions or comments. Thank you, Dr. Dahl. Very, very thorough report. We'll move on to section 9 of the agenda, the treasurer's report. Mrs. Kraus.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see, am I? All right, I move to approve the financial report ending March 31, 2021, and the condensed board summary report for March 2021.
Second.
The motion before the board to approve the treasurer's report called the financial report, as well as the combined monthly report, both ending March 31st, and it has been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, could I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Fee,
You're muted.
Sorry. Aye.
Mr. Hollival,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Otowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, item 2, move to approve the food service fund statement of operations ending March 31, 2021.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to approve the food service statement of operations ending March 31st, and it's been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Otowski,
Yes.
Mr. Hollival,
Aye.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
I'll combine these next three. Move to approve Student Activity Fund ending March 31, 2021. Biglerville High School Principal's Account ending March 31, 2021. And the Biglerville High School Tech Agency Account ending March 31, 2021.
So moved.
There's a motion before the board, item 9, 3, 4, and 5, reports ending the end of March of 2021. It's been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, could I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Otowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Hollaba,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mrs. Kraus. Before we go to the consent agenda, having reviewed the consent agenda, does anyone have anything they would like to have pulled out and voted and discussed on separately? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda as written? There's a motion before the board to approve the consent agenda as written, and it has been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, there are some contract type items in here, so we'll need a roll call, please.
Mr. Lady, Mr. Otowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Hollaba,
Aye.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right, we move on to committee reports. Finance, Mrs. Kraus.
The first item is a presentation of the 2021-22 budget update.
Thank you. Just one moment. And whoops. Is everyone able to see my screen?
I can.
Okay, thank you. So for this evening, we do have a brief agenda that I would like to cover. And then the very last item will need, I will need a direction from the board to prepare the preliminary budget for the May 4th meeting. So we're just going to dive right in. The first thing we're going to talk about a little bit is the projections for the end of the year of fiscal year 21, so ending June 30th, 2021. If you look in the center column where it says fiscal year 21 actuals as of 3/31, I'm just going to walk down through this a little bit and then expand over onto the projections. The estimated total revenue as of March 31st is a little bit over $25,500,000. And that is actual revenue the district has received as of March 31st. If we look at the projection of what we're looking for and estimating for ending June 30th, we're a little bit over $30,214,000. So once again, I'm looking at what has come in, projecting that out for the rest of the remaining 3 months of the budget. For the expenses, the actuals were about $21,391,000, and that's bills that have actually been paid through the business office as of 3/31. I would like to remind you that the bills that are coming in March are from February into March. So it's not, sometimes they are running a month behind. So we have to take that into consideration as we are looking at projections. What we're estimating for June 30th is about $30,211,000. So we're about breaking even between revenues and expenses at this point. Once again, these are estimates. If there's bills out there that are unknown, if we have students in placement that we haven't received any bills throughout the year, sometimes they come in at the end of the year. We have to take that into account, which may not be known at this point because I don't have any current history of that. So once again, this is an estimate. This is something that I do monitor throughout the year. That's another reason why I've updated and provided that monthly tracking that has been added to the board agendas earlier this year.
So before you leave this slide, I want to point out that the variance figure has gone from 636, almost 637 million coming out of the unassigned fund to just under 3,000 going into it, recognizing all of the caveats that you mentioned, but that's what that means, correct?
Yeah, that is correct, yes. Any other questions about projections ending June 30th, 2021?
They would take into account all of the costs associated with the anti-racism that Dr. Dahl just went over.
That
right?
is correct,
Everything
yes.
that we know about is included in there. But if there would be additional costs, then that would change that variance number in the opposite direction.
It could, depending where other items are coming in throughout the remaining 3 months. So it might have an offset as well, but that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? I just wanted to recap and give another update on projected revenue for fiscal year 22. So this is ending June 30th, 2022. If you look to the right, there's a green column that says the preliminary budget as of April 6th, and then one to the far right, which is April 20th, 2021. That has been updated for this evening's presentation. And you will notice the change being in the federal revenue that has increased because as we talked about last time about the ESSER funds, we talked about the ESSER 2 funds and the ESSER 3 funds with the loss of learning. And as an administrative team, we did gather and we looked at the loss of learning and how we would like to use some of those funds, which is what I'm showing an updated form. Once again, this is draft because we're still tweaking this as we are looking through. On the right-hand side for learning loss, we need to spend about $344,000 on learning loss. So as an administrative team, we've looked at things that are currently in our budget that we can use the ESSER funds for. So we are not adding to our budget with the ESSER funds that we are receiving. We are looking within our budget of what the current expenses are, things that are already planned by our administrators, and looking to see the appropriate uses that we can use the ESSER funds. Each year, at the end of the year, Dr. Corwell does have a group of students that come in for extended school year, and that's what I have abbreviated with ESY. And we already have that budgeted, but we can also use the ESSER funds for that offset. And we can also include transportation in there, and we have some extended learning that will be done through the IU, and that's an estimated as well. And as we go down through, once again, we're looking at using the ESSER 3 funds, which I'm showing here for the learning loss on the right-hand side. For extended school year, you heard Mr. Alvin talking about the after-school program at Biglerville Elementary and looking to see how we may be able to expand that. There is software that we currently have budgeted that the district does use, the teachers do use to track student data, which is all part of learning loss, and we can use the ESSER funds for that. And we also added some funds in the learning loss, which we can use for mental health. So you're going to see we have that carried down through the $344,000. We have almost all of it allocated except about $6,200 at this point. So once again, I really appreciate the administrative team coming together and looking what we can do, looking what's currently in our budget and how it can be offset. So that is why when you're looking at the presentation, And we're talking about the federal funds increasing on this column, far right column, about $91,000. That is accounting for the learning loss that we're incorporating for next year's budget. So that's the change on this form.
Can I ask a question?
Sure thing.
Shelley, is it my understanding the ESSER funds are processed through like drawdowns? So
That is correct.
we have to essentially front the money before we are reimbursed.
That is correct,
And
yes.
could you point out when you come to your presentation, how to allocate that funding?
It's right here.
It is right in front of,
Well, it's on the slide there. That's,
okay, so we are in a position where we can do that is what I'm getting at. Yes.
That is correct, yes. The timing of when those transactions would occur and us submitting the quarterly reports to get those funds in is sort of like as you were mentioning, the drawdown.
Okay, thank you.
the ESSER funding is very analogous to our PSERS funding. PSERS is 39 point something for the coming year. We have to budget for all of that expense, even though we'll get back 50 to 60% of it. So in our budget, in expenditures, we have all of the PSER expenses, and buried inside the revenue from the state is what we estimate we're going to get back from them. So in this case, with the ESSERS funding, the expenses are in our revenue, or I'm sorry, are in our expenditures. And the money that we could get back after we've spent it, basically, as you point out, Cindy, when you spend it, then you get reimbursed. That is buried in the federal funding. So it's all there, but we don't get that federal funding until we essentially show a receipt for what we already spent.
And I would just also like to comment underneath federal revenue, when Mr. Alden was mentioning earlier this evening about not knowing the allocations for next year, this is the line that it could impact once we find out those actual figures. What I have in here currently is what we are receiving for this fiscal year. So once again, we don't have those concrete numbers yet. Mr. Alden will hopefully have those early May. Any other questions on the updated revenue, projected revenue? On the next slide, I just wanted to do a very quick recap as well on the projected expenses for fiscal year 22. The far right columns, the one for preliminary budget April 20th, and then the variance. Just to remind everyone what has caused the variance, I'm just going to go quickly line by line. And once again, you'll see a little bit of an increase from the April 6th to the April 20th, because that's about a $15,000 difference. As I mentioned, that's what we added into the ESSER 3 loss of learning for the mental health. So that was updated as well. Underneath salaries from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, it's increased a little bit over $526,000. That does include contractual increases, the positions that we've been talking about, what's currently the long-term sub for art and the long-term sub for music. It also has in there the open position that we have in special education that we would asking for approval this evening to convert that to an occupational therapist position, and also the opening for an assistant principal at the intermediate school. In salaries, it also does account for adjusting for the minimum wage increase if that does happen in Governor Wolf's budget. We still have not heard any movement on any budget information out of the state. So once again, we just have some of these put in here because we don't know what could happen. So once again, we have to, take that as we're going through this budget as well. In the 200s, it's increased a little bit over almost 62,000. That is due to tuition reimbursement as staff members take courses, we do reimburse them for that according to their contracts. And over the last several years, we have not budgeted enough in that category, so we've compensated for that. It does include the increase with PESERS and Social Security. As PESERS is almost 35% for next year, it's 34.94%. And it does represent a decrease in workman's compensation because we've not had that trend. So that's why there is that variance. In the 300 series, this was the classification of moving Aramark out of the 300 series into the 400 series. So you can see that adjustment between the two. The 500 series had a large increase as well. Once again, that's sort of where our tuition for cyber and charter schools is housed. Our tuition for Cumberland Perry is housed. Our transportation is in that category along with communications. So I did increase transportation for next year, not knowing what parameters may come out as we're looking at returning students. In the 600 series, we have an increase just shy of almost $90,000, and that's with software tech supplies. In the 700s, it's dealing with some leases. And then between the rest of the 800s and the 900s, that's dealing with the, you can see the difference between the interest and the principal, shifting from interest down into the principal for our bonds. So that's just a recap of what the expenses, why the expenses, and also showing the increase of adding the mental health component from the April 6th to the April 20th proposed.
Shelley, when you were mentioning the 100 levels on salaries, are we also supposed to hire a new health teacher to replace Mrs. Gardner?
That would be a replacement. So sort of we have the retirement of Mrs. Showers. And then Mrs. Gardner moved into that. So whatever that difference of the salary would be. And then, so we still have a vacant salary in there. It's not adding additional dollars to the budget.
Okay, thank you.
And then that will be the same thing with any of the other vacant positions that are currently on the board as resignations this evening. Any other questions? So taking the proposed revenues along with the proposed expenses, I've updated this chart. This is a chart as I showed 2 weeks ago as well. So you look at the columns on the left-hand side a little bit, if there isn't a tax increase, and updating what the unassigned fund balance would be. So as we look at the preliminary April 20th, if there isn't a tax increase, our variance or what we would need to take from our unassigned fund balance is almost $1.2 million. Looking across to the right, you could see the fund balance that we wouldn't have to take as much from the fund balance if there is a tax increase, if that's how the board is looking to move this evening as I prepare the preliminary budget for fiscal year 22. And as we talked 2 weeks ago, we asked, what would happen with the fund balance if we also looked at using some of the PESERS assigned money. So that's what we're going to discuss next. So for an example, if we look at not having a tax increase and not using anything from our PESERS, you could see that 1.1, almost 1.2 that we had used from the unassigned balance. As you go down the chart, if we would use $15,000 from our PESERS assigned money, that would take the assigned PESERS fund down to $216,000. And then we would be using $1,178,000 out of our unassigned fund balance. So that's how you read this chart as you look down through. So once again, if we have a 0% increase, but we're using $60,000 from PESERS, our unassigned, we would need to use $1.1 million. And the same is true as we go through the next tax options that we've been mentioning in the previous weeks. So if there is a 1% tax increase, we would have to use from our unassigned balance a little bit over $1 million. But if we would take $15,000 from PSERS, we'd only need to use $1,047,000.
Shelley, may I ask a question?
Sure thing.
Actually, two questions. The first is, what is this assigned PSERS fund balance that you're talking about taking money from?
Okay, within our fund balances, we have assigned money, which means money that has been set aside specifically for a special purpose. And in this case, it was set aside to use for PSERS only. So when we would make our PSERS payments, we would use $15,000 from that assigned and not take it from out of our general fund operating budget of the $30 million that we're talking about approving for expenses.
Okay.
And then that assigned fund balance for PSERS would just decrease. And then we would still have that set aside basically as our rainy day PSERS fund in the future.
Okay. Hearing the way the costs associated with PSERS are escalating so in such a scary manner, is it dangerous to take out of our PSERS rainy day fund?
I would say it's not scary to take it out of there. That's the purpose of why the board many years ago has set it aside to use it for circumstances that may come up. And as Mr. Fee talked about earlier this evening, I personally haven't read, all the information that has come out from PSERS of how or what the impact of that may be to the districts. So I don't feel comfortable speaking what that may change, but they have locked in our rate for next year. So I don't see that going up. If anything, I think it may actually impact the employees of what they're paying in. From what I was reading briefly, if they were in certain classes, it may bump up 0.5% of what the employee may be paying. But please don't quote me on that yet.
That's my understanding of it too, Shelley. It's going to increase the employees' contribution, not necessarily ours. I think the last figure I saw was 34.51 is what our fund is going to be. But I wouldn't be doing my job that I've assigned myself to, and that is we're taking from a one-time fund to pay a recurring cost. So unless you're willing to take $15,000 every year till the fund's gone, and then replacing that money,
Right.
you're paying one-time costs, or you're paying recurring costs with one-time money.
And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give the annual retort to what you just said, which is, why do you have this fund if you're not going to use it?
I'm not arguing that. All I'm saying is it's a short-term solution to a long-term problem.
Right. Now, back to Mr. Hollabaw's issue. I chuckled when you said it's kind of scary. 10 years ago, PSERS was in the neighborhood of 5%. Now it's up to
34.51, I think is what,
34%.
I think I saw that today.
So this fund came about, the board in the past said, we need to have some sort of a cushion because we just couldn't project what it was going to be. And so that's where this fund came from. And to my knowledge, we have only dipped into it once. We voted to dip into it 2 or 3 times, but it turned out it wasn't necessary.
Right.
Okay, thank you. The other question that I had, I remember a conversation at our April 6th meeting was that with regard to the variance amount, it had to be maintained at a certain percentage. What was that again? And how do these numbers here relate to what we have to have there?
Okay, so you're referencing the fund balance has to be within a certain percent of the expense. And we are still within that certain percent. We cannot be over the 8%.
Yeah, it's
of our expenses.
2 to 8% by policy.
Then moving on to some other tax rate options. Sorry if I can get this to move now. There we go. If the board's looking at a 1.5% increase, the money that would need to be used from the unassigned obviously is smaller. And once again, if you're using money from the teaser fund, it also helps offset that money, that variance. And then the same would be true for the 2.1% increase. And once again, I just picked the 2.1 because that is half of our index, which our index is 4.2, which is the max that we could raise. So that's why I chose 2.1 to be representative here. So once again, if the board's looking at raising taxes by 2.1% and saying $15,000 from PESers, you can see the amount that would need to come from the unassigned fund balance, which would be a little bit over $900,000. And then that would still be leaving just shy of $700,000 in the unassigned fund balance. And then I also have a 2.5 representative and 3%, which is showing more on what we've discussed. And then also the 4.2. So at this point, I would like some discussion with the board of where you would like to see a tax increase, if that's the way that you're looking at. And I can pull up those screens and we can look at those charts again to help in your conversations.
Let me make a couple of comments here that kind of lead into a bigger discussion. You have heard and perhaps read about all this ESSER funding is going to solve all the problems. And so if school boards raise taxes, they're not looking at things correctly. Last year, we had a 0% tax increase. We did that consciously. We knew that there was some risk involved. It's working out. But we also said at the time, there's no way we can do this 2 years in a row. And one of the ways that we made that work last year is we had 2 retiring teachers that we replaced on a temporary basis with long-term subs. We did this with the concurrence of the association because we told them we would never do this permanently. So this year we have to replace those 2 teachers, a music teacher and an art teacher. We have committed to an assistant principal for the intermediate school, which has doubled in size. And we also are converting a special ed a teacher to an occupational therapist. And there's a commensurate increase in pay. All of that comes to about $235,000 in salary. The figure you see over here in the 100 series was about 526. Well, 235,000 of that is based on those positions. To that, you have to add about $90,000 in PESers and about $28,000 in Social Security. And all of that comes to 350, in broad terms, $350,000. If you look at the tax increase of 2 to 2.1%, that raises $275,000. That means that increase in tax, which is half of what our index is, does not raise the same amount of money that we know we have to spend for these 4 new positions. So just because the federal government has come in with all this over-the-top money does not mean we're flush with cash. And the business administrator has done an excellent job of finding out what we can take from our expenses and pay that with the federal money. And those expenses are in the expenditures and the federal money is in the revenue. But in order to balance the budget, we're going to need to raise taxes. The other thing I want to point out, and I made a point of asking Mrs. Hobbs at the beginning, on her very first slide, she mentioned that with at least 100 caveats, that the $636,000 that we're planning to take out of the unassigned fund, we may not have to take that out. Bills come in at different levels and different times. And so if we, in order to have a $30 million budget, you don't want to hit it right on the button because you don't need much of a mistake to have a real problem on your hands. However, here it is April, and we're looking at when we were all sitting around here last year, we said we're going to need to take $636,000 out of our unassigned fund balance. So I would offer to you this. Based on the projections that she has and the additional expenses that we've incurred because of the anti-racism thing, if we took the 636 and said, let's reduce that by a third. Okay, that's what, $210,000. If we take that $210,000 and we go over to the slide that shows 2.1% tax increase, it starts out with an unassigned fund balance of 1.598 million. If you add the 210 I just talked about, I believe that goes up to about 1.8 million. So if you take that figure and you use, let's just pick 45,000 from the PSERS fund, you find that the unassigned fund balance at the end of the year comes to about 936,000. Or somewhere in that neighborhood. I'll let the business manager, hone that down. So I think there's a real need for us to limit the tax increase, and the 2.1% is half of our index. I think it's a reasonable compromise between the index and no tax increase, which we did last year. And with those adjustments that I just made, which I'm not even sure I've discussed that with you yet, Mrs. Hobbs, whether you're sitting over there going, this guy's crazy. But I'm basing what I'm saying to you all on the numbers that Mrs. Hobbs has presented and thinking my way through this as I reviewed and got ready for this meeting. So I will be quiet and listen to the other members of the board here. But I think what Mrs. Hobbs is really getting at is she needs to know tonight what kind of a tax increase we're looking at and how much of the PSERS fund to use.
That's correct.
Well, I would add, and I think you're alluding to this, President, but we did not have a tax increase last year, but that does not necessarily even though we're allowed to, that doesn't necessarily give us the right to increase it to the max. And I don't think we're in that position, and the community's in that position where we should go that route. That said, I do think a minimal tax increase is probably necessary. I would not want to I don't think I would vote for anything above the 2.5 for sure.
Again, Shelley, help me understand just a little bit more. In past years, you probably have shown a slide and I just don't recall it. In past years, how many times have we dipped into the unassigned fund balance to
Every single
every year?
year.
And how much of that did we actually spend? Given over the last 5 years? I mean, is it typical that we actually don't spend as much as we anticipated?
From the data that I remember seeing as I was pulling together information, I think there was 1 year that it was dipped into the fund balance as it was budgeted. And I think that was maybe about 3 years ago, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. Every other year, money has been added to the fund balance, and that could be revenues coming in stronger, or once again, the administrators being very conscious of the spending that is happening in their buildings. And they do a great job on monitoring those items as well.
No kidding. That's amazing to me.
Typically, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We typically always budget that we will use money from the unassigned fund balance. It's the only way to balance the budget, unless you just cut programs.
Sure. Sure.
I mean, because your expenses for the school district, just like the expenses that you experience in your personal life, go up each year. What is difficult to really get a good number for is what the expenses actually going to be. You budget so that you don't come up short. But the expenses don't always come in like that. And you may recall when, I guess it was January, Mrs. Hobbs recalled on the annual audit done for last year and went through each of the expense items and why it was different than what we budgeted. And the reasons are as varied as the expenses themselves.
Okay.
So you do the best you can, but this is a $30 million budget. And if you were off by 2%, somebody quick tell me what 2% of 30 million is. Yeah, it's a big number. So if Shelley was 98% accurate, 2% inaccurate, then there would be whatever that number was,
I
variance.
understand.
And if that variance was a negative, I mean, revenues exceeded, expenditures exceeded revenues by that 2%, we'd be in serious trouble.
But Tom, what you're suggesting or proposing is a 2.1% tax increase, which also includes using the unassigned funds as well as PSERS.
There's no question you have to use unassigned funds. I mean, you
And
can't.
but we would use it in additionally, the PSERS is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
How much of the unassigned fund balance and how much of the PSERS is the next question, but we're putting this carpet down. You got to nail down one corner at a time.
And that's potentially, if our track record is going to be sustained, even in the midst of all these challenges and an unprecedented year, we may not even use the PSERS.
That's correct. We might not.
And on the side effects.
Just because you budget it doesn't.
Sure.
I think you're muted, Ron.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that's impressive that we've never even used it when we budgeted for it.
Wow.
Personally, I do.
Well, we may not use it and we may not need it, but if we increase taxes, we will take that money from the taxpayers.
That's correct.
Yes, yes.
That's not going to go unused or untaken. And I think that's a relevant difference between the PSERS, the unassigned fund balance, and
Right.
increasing taxes.
But once the unassigned fund balance is gone, it's gone. You have no cushion then. So if you're suggesting reducing the property tax increase and use more and more and more of the unassigned fund balance, I would submit to you that if the coming year there was an expense, a big one, we are experiencing that this year. If that happened and the unassigned fund balance was gone, we have nowhere to turn.
You're cutting programs and staff.
Exactly.
You finished, Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, I'm thinking similar to you are, Tom. You're looking at half of the 4.2 that were allowed. We're looking at 500,000 roughly in salaries and benefits and so forth, recurring costs. And taking half of that 5% or 2.5%, we'd at least cover a large portion of that, rather than 4.2 looking at it as the amount we're allowed, whatever, by the state. I'm looking at it from a more practical point of view. If we're going to increase expenditures 5%, we at least ought to cover half of that with our recurring revenue or taxes.
Well, your logic, is understandable, but I think based on the fact that it appears at this point, we're going to use maybe none of the unassigned fund balance that we said we were going to use from last year, that we could then drop that to 2.1 and be comfortable. And my estimate was only using a third of that. So, that still leaves 400,000 and change that we said we were going to spend out of the 636 available for, the issues that Mrs. Hobbs said might come up. That
Right.
She doesn't know. And that's what drove me to the.
Okay, I understand your thinking. I'm just saying you cannot continue to increase expenditures by 5% and revenue by 2%.
No, but I only have to deal with this year.
Okay. Short-term solution to a long-term problem, and that's how we end up painting ourselves in a corner.
Right, but the corner that for those of you that are new on the board, this is the annual
Annual discussion.
Tom show. The corner that you allude that we're painting ourselves into, we haven't actually painted ourselves into for at least the previous 4 years.
But I've been on longer than 4 years, and we've worked hard to get it where it is. And I don't want to go back to
the period
where we're
of
looking at what programs we're going to cut this year and what
Right.
teachers we're going to cut and what positions we're going to cut.
And I would point out that in that same extended period that you're talking about, included the Great Recession, included massive increases in PSERS and massive increases in charter school expenses. And we're not experiencing those at this point.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with 2.1, looking at the numbers. And I get what you're saying, 2.5, the difference is revenue. The difference is 100 and, help me showing. Total revenues of 2.5 is 30,915,000 versus 30,862,000. So $50,000. So we're at a position here where we have 2.1 or 2.5. I haven't heard anybody else offer any thoughts on any other numbers.
I would like to just, I was curious, what did we raise taxes the year before? What was the percentage? Do you know? I'm sure that's something you can pull right out of that head of yours.
We can go back. You're talking about in 2019.
Mhm.
I'm guessing, I would guess in about the 2.5% range, I think.
My question, or my point is that generally what our tax increases are?
We have gone, in my time on the board, we've gone as high as about 3.2%, 3.1%.
Ooh.
If you go back and look at what the index was, our tax increases have generally been very near the index.
Thank you.
We could look that information up for you, though.
It appears as though we're working our way around the circle here, and I got lucky, I guess, since Mr. Everett and I switched seats tonight, so I'm not in the direct line of fire. Maybe that was intentional, that there was going to be a lot of back and forth between
This
the
was
two of
going
you.
to happen no matter where everybody was sitting.
It's an annual event.
So we can do this. I haven't heard any other proposal. So we have 2.1 or 2.5. So what I have done in the past is I've polled each person individually, and I can do that now. And then we can see where we stand. So I will start with, if I can get my computer to wake up.
Do you mind if I just ask one more question?
No,
Please.
please ask all the questions you want.
Again, and I'm not looking at the right screen, but if we came down 1 point, is it 1.5? I'm not sure. There you go.
The other example I had was 1.5. Once again, these were examples I put out. The board can decide to go with whatever number they would like.
If in the past we have, as Mr. Hollaball said, a point well taken, and when we increase the taxes, we will use that, obviously. And if we haven't used the unassigned fund balance in the past, even though it's been part of balancing the budget, and now we're adding PSERS on top of it, the likelihood in my mind is that we may not use that again, but we still are asking the public to pay an increased tax. Is there anything of value to consider 1.5 increase instead? And if we have to dip into them, that's what those things are for. That fund, as I understand it. I mean, I'm still conscious of people trying to get their footing back with their jobs, and I mean, we all are. And many are still unemployed, struggling restaurant owners, people. If there's any way possible, I still would like to consider what we could do to ease that burden.
I'm uncomfortable with that because the underlying assumption, what you said is everything that's happened in the past will happen in the future.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I can't guarantee that.
No, we can't.
And but the idea is, you know, if we have a 1.5% tax increase and it turns out not enough, well, we'll just take it out of the unassigned fund balance to make ends meet, you know, in the middle of the year, which we would do. But that is the absolute diametric opposite argument of what Ron's saying, which is we're in a relatively good financial position now. And I'm suggesting 2.1% versus his 2%. You're suggesting something less. We
Okay, so Ron, you're suggesting 2%,
2.5.
2.5.
Half of our increase for the salaries alone, they are recurring costs.
Mhm.
And you'll keep hearing me saying recurring costs, that gets them off. Yeah, I'm okay. You have recurring costs. Every year, you're going to keep paying it. You hire an employee, you're going to pay them this year, you're going to pay them next year, you're going to pay them the following year. And if you start paying them out of your unassigned fund balance, it's like taking it out of your savings. How long can you fund somebody out of your savings account?
Mhm. I understand.
You've overspent
Sure.
or undertaxed. So
What do you think, Sue?
My question was going to be if Shelley could refresh for us the average cost for a 2.1% increase and 2.5. What I think you showed us the last meeting what the average cost would be
Right
for
there.
a taxpayer.
Yes, so at I'm sorry, did you ask for 2% or 2.1?
No, 2.1 and
Okay.
2.5.
So a 2.1, it's just about $59. And a 2.25 is about $63, and a 2.5 is about $70. An increase based upon an assessed home of $183,158.
okay.
Mr. Wilson, I have to say, while we digest a little bit what's going on, just to offer my 2 cents or 2.5 cents, maybe. I sit a little closer to Cindy and her side of things than I do on Mr. Everett's side. Whereas I'm enjoying the annual debate between the two of you. And academically, I totally understand where you're both coming from. I find it a little bit puzzling that you made the comment, Mr. Wilson, that the one-time money, you have to spend it eventually. Otherwise, why is it there? But why does that apply to the Peters money, but not the fund balance? And if we didn't raise taxes last year, but used, was it 600 and some odd $1,000 from fund balance and didn't end up needing any of it, then one could argue that we've already covered the variance in salaries by last year's decision. And so we don't have to raise taxes at all, and it's already covered. We've already done it, and we don't have to raise taxes. And I realize financially and with a pen and paper or on screen how you can argue that isn't true, and I understand that. But I have to say, I hear Cindy and I agree that we're coming through an absolutely unprecedented year. We have people that haven't worked, that aren't working. And I'm having trouble sitting here understanding why we're saying we must raise taxes.
What's the unemployment rate in Adams County right now?
I don't know.
5%.
Okay.
What's full employment when you take an economics course?
What when I take
What
an
is the definition of what percent of unemployment is considered full employment?
I don't know. I'm a fruit grower, not an economist
Okay,
or a
used to be
teacher.
Used to be 4%.
Okay.
So 4% unemployment was at some point used to be considered that you were fully employed. The rest of the people were, going in circles looking for work or whatever. So
you're saying only 1% of people in Adams County really aren't employed because definitions
I'm not saying that.
I'm sorry, I don't.
All I'm saying is it's not as dire as it certainly was a year ago. And we just had a discussion earlier this evening saying, what are we going to do next year? We're going to be in school And the tenor of that conversation was, we sure hope that COVID's all done so we can get everybody back in school. Well, if COVID's all done and everybody's back in school, that would also argue that everybody is also back to some form of work.
Please let it be so.
Yes, I certainly hope so. So I'm not necessarily buying into, that things will be as bad in the upcoming year as they certainly were in this last year. But we still, we need to come to a number tonight. So now we have three numbers: 2.5, 2.1, and 1.5. Are we ready to have me go around and ask everybody what they want?
And 2% is not, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry? 2% is not an option. I think you're muted. Cindy, I thought your number was 1.5. Are you saying now? Any number between 0 and 4.2 is possible. Any 1.3578 is possible if that's what the board decides on. So
Kelly won't like that as much probably.
So did you have a number other than? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I would like to propose 2.0%.
Okay, so now we have 2.5, 2.1, and 2.0. Any other numbers?
I'm going to be wild and crazy and propose 1.3, which is the Social Security Administration's cost of living adjustment from 2020.
Okay, so we have 2.5, 2.1, 2.0, and 1.3. And what does 1.3 do here?
It's not on there.
No, but
Oh, okay.
1.5 is. Any other numbers?
I'll second your 2.1.
Oh, hang on a second here. We're going to ask everybody, and I'm going to keep a scorecard here. Chris Fee, what do you think for those four numbers? Which one would you vote for?
Well, it's always unpopular to raise taxes by any amount. I take, my position is that my responsibility is first and foremost to the education of the children. And everybody says that, but then a lot of people feel, and I think that people have raised really good points. And I don't want any of you to think I don't think these are good points, but I'm the kind of guy who, if there's no money in savings, I am very uncomfortable. And I feel the same way about the schools, because if this year has taught me anything, it's that I don't know what to expect. And I also, I'll say for you, Bruce, I don't get involved in the annual argument, but every year I point out to Mr. Wilson that I'm also voting to increase my own taxes. It's just not other people's taxes. This has a direct impact on all of us, and I understand that. But I will always side with the Ebert and say I feel safer. I feel that my responsibility is to make sure that I can do the best that I can to cover my bases relative to funding the education of the children. So I say 2.5.
Okay, got there. Okay, Mr. Lady.
It was like a German sentence, you know.
Yeah, Mr. Lady, what's your number?
I'm stewing. I'm sorry.
Mrs. Kraus, what's your number?
I am comfortable going above 2.1.
Okay. Mr. Hollabaugh.
May I ask a question before I answer the question?
Yes.
This is one part of a triad, is based on the conversations we've been having. Are we saying that we're deciding on a percentage to use, but what about the other two pieces?
We'll have to get to those after we set this one. Okay, Mr. Witowski.
I'll concur with your 2.1, Mr. President.
Mrs. Jancic. I'm sorry, I think you're muted.
I will go with 2.1.
Mr. Everett, 2.5.
Would it surprise you if I said the 2.5 I argued for?
No, it wouldn't surprise, but I want you to say it.
2.5.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who am I missing here? Oh, Mr. Lady, how are you getting closer?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm on mute.
No, you're not.
No, you're good.
Just sitting here. I'm gonna go with 2.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Mr. Hallwell.
I too will go with 2.
Mr. Hallwell goes with 2. And I'm the only guy left. And since I proposed 2.1, I'm going to go with the 2.1. So we have 2 at 2.5, 1, 2, 3, 4 at 2.1, and 2 at 2.0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's eight board members. Yes, Ron.
No, I was pointing to Ed. Ed's the one who's not voting.
Oh, I thought you were.
No.
Okay. Now let's look at how much we want to take from the Peasers Fund. Mr. Evans, do you remember when this fund came into existence?
Oh, gosh.
4 or 5 years ago?
4 or 5 years ago, yeah.
And in that 4 or 5 years, we have actually spent $15,000.
Right.
We have budgeted several times, but because of the vagaries of the budgeting execution process, I should say, we have not had to use it. But past performance is not to be used as indicative of future performance. So I need some numbers that people are comfortable with taking money out of the Peasers Fund. Ron.
What do we have in there? 70, 75? 230. Okay. And what were some of your examples, Shelley? 30, 35?
I have 15, 30, 45, and 60.
All right. Let's go with your 30. Okay. You're right for once, Bruce.
Okay, so we got 30,000. 30,000. If we took 30,000 out each year, the fund would last for over 7 years.
How many?
7.
Okay, I was thinking somebody said 31 or 310. It's
and
how much is in there?
231,000.
Okay, I misheard.
Anyone else have a number that they like? At this point, what we're really deciding is how much of the unassigned fund balance will
Right.
here. And so, you know, whether we use 30,000 or 45,000, it's a difference of, you got it, 15,000 that would change the unassigned fund balance. And I'm not hard over on any particular number other than 0. But I think we should spend some of this. We should budget to spend some of it. So in order just to have a robust discussion, I'm going to suggest 45,000. So we can go around the room again and see what people think. Any other numbers? Okay, Mr. Fee, what do you think?
I think 30 is reasonable, but I wouldn't go to the mat for that because the reality is that we've put the money in that account, but if we end up spending down all our money, we're going to end up spending all our money from all those accounts. So if I had to, I'd go to the 45, but I prefer the 30.
Okay. Mr. Lady? Okay. Mr. Hollabaugh?
The 30 is what I'd like to go with, but may I ask a question? In season, when Mrs. Hobbs is wildly spending money, if we say 30 today, can we say, let's make it 28, or actually use only 28? And if the fund balance will cover the difference, can we say, no, let's only do 28 and use the rest out of the fund balance? Or do we have to spend?
We do not have to spend it. In fact, as I pointed out earlier, I can think of at least one other occasion, and I think twice, where we budgeted to use it, but because expenses didn't come in as high as we thought, or revenue came in higher than we thought, we didn't have to use any of it. So, you know, I hesitate to say it's fungible, but we're not committing to spending 30,000.
Think of it as your savings account, Bruce. You can have 2 savings accounts. I can take it out of this one, I can take it out of this one. Again, the thing I keep cautioning about is if you're using your savings account to pay for everyday costs that are recurring, you're in trouble in a hurry.
I always think of the Peasers account, sort of my escrow account, right? Because it's for a very specific kind of expense that is very important, and I'm worried about it. That I try to keep it separate for that reason. But it comes when all is said and done, that's the pool. You know, we could put that money together if we had to,
right?
And
but
someday we may.
And the other side of that argument is, we didn't print this money. This money came from the taxpayer. So if we you know, hoard this money and never use it, then, you know, we're not really being responsible with other people's money.
Another way of putting it, every dollar we spend is taxpayer dollar.
Every single one of them.
That's
Mr. Everett.
Mr. Everett, you're up.
I'm sorry. I thought I said 30,000.
Okay, got it. All right. Mrs. Janzik
3-0 is fine with me.
and Mr. Rutowski.
30,000.
Who am I missing? Oh, Mrs. Kraus, sorry.
Well, I just want to mention, when we talk about the one time we did use the Pacers money, it was last year when we didn't have a tax increase. So we used it, we had to use it to balance. And I'm just giving that as background, but I too would go with 30,000 this year. And part of my reasoning there is if we're raising taxes, we need to pull more from what we have.
All right. Well, I vote for the 45,000, but the majority said 30, and so that's what we'll go with. So, do you have what you need from us, Shelley?
Yes, and to confirm, prepare the preliminary budget for the May 4th at 2.1% tax increase, and also using $30,000 from Peaser's fund.
Right. And the remainder then from the unassigned balance.
Correct.
And this slide, which I think was number 5, when we come back for the next committee meeting, hopefully you'll have some other, some more current information. If you could update that slide for sure, that would be very helpful for us.
Sure.
The committee meeting is before we submit the preliminary budget. So we still have one more opportunity to adjust what we're looking at here. I know that this takes a lot of time, and I appreciate your thoughts. I like the idea that there's new board members who are offering different perspective, and it's healthy for all of us to listen to one another and come up with consensus. So thank you.
I have one more question, if I may. Dr. Fee's comment that he would not go to the mat over making it 45. I'm just curious if Mr. Everett and Mr. Wilson have ever gone to the mat over recurring costs versus one-time costs.
No,
No, but I would pay to see that.
this is one of the tenets of being an effective board is to have people who can disagree in a collegiate manner, and disagreeing does not mean we're members of the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House. We can have differences of opinion, and we work it out, and we come to some kind of a compromise solution. So no, there's never been any mats involved.
My father is whispering in my ear right now. He used to tell me regularly, son, you're entitled to your opinion, no matter how wrong it is.
Yeah. All right. So we're back to, well, first of all, Mrs. Hobbs, we sort of got off, we took your presentation away from you. Are you completed?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, and you're happy with what you've got to work with here? All right. Yeah, at the end of the day, she has to make the numbers work. So if we come up with something that's completely off the wall, we have to start over. All right, Mrs. Kraus, you continue in the finance section.
Okay, item 11.2, move to approve the renewal of the professional software for nurses, PSNI SNAP Health Center annual subscription contract, September 1, 2021 through August 31, 2022, for users of the subscription licenses at an annual cost of $3,120 per the attached document. And note, there is no increase from fiscal year 21.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to approve the renewal of the professional software for nurses. This is item 11.1.2, and it's been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, could I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Ratowski,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Hollowell,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Moving on, item 11.3, recommend approval of the Johnson Controls Service Solution Agreement for a 5-year agreement, June 1, 2021 to May 31, 2026, in the amount of $5,145 per the attached agreement. Now, this increased $1,135 from the fiscal year 21 contract due to additional fire alarm devices as described in the attached document.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to recommend approval of Johnson Controls Service Solution Agreement. Item 11.1.3 in your agenda, and it has been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, could I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ratowski,
Yes.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Hollaball,
Aye.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Next item, move to approve specialty coatings to complete the project of spiral duct air handler painting in Pitzer Gymnasium, Billerville High School, in the amount of $13,200 as approved on the March 16, 2021 capital expenditure listing.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to approve the specialty coatings for the Pitzer Gymnasium spiral duct and air handler. It's been seconded. This is item 11.1.4 in your agenda. Any discussion? Does this money come out of the capital funds?
That is correct. Capital reserve, and it's came in at the what was budgeted for, the 13,200.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Ratowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Hollaball,
Aye.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Moving on, move to approve the 2021-2022 Chartwell's annual budget contract renewal as per the attached contract.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to approve the 2021-22 Chartwell's annual budget, item 11.1.5 in your agenda. It's been seconded. Any discussion? Mrs. Hobbs, it seems like I recall there was a guaranteed profit in the past. I didn't see it in this contract. Is it there somewhere, a basic contract?
There is no guarantee for next fiscal year for 21-22 due to pandemic and not knowing what reimbursement may be. We are showing that we are operating in the black for next year, and we currently are for this year.
Right. All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Hollaball,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Ratowski,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
And finally, move to approve the educational services proposal from the LIU 12 for service number 3 only, comprehensive planning integration at the cost of $3,000 per the attached agreement.
Second.
The motion before the board to approve the educational services proposal from LIU 12. Item 11.1.6 in your agendas. It's been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, could I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Ratowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Hollaball,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mrs. Kraus. We move on to personnel. Mr. Ratowski.
Okay, I'm going to bundle, for the sake of time, 1A, 2A, 2B, and 2C together. So I'd like to recommend the approval of the following professional job descriptions for the school-based occupational therapist and the secondary intervention credit recovery teacher as noted in 2A, 1 and 2. I will also recommend the approval to accept the retirement of Karen Peterson with gratitude for her 33 years of service, and the retirement of Michael Gergel with 24 years of service as a math science teacher, as noted in items 2B, 1, and 2. And then would like to recommend the approval to post and advertise for the following positions: the school-based occupational therapist, the secondary intervention credit recovery teacher, and the math science teacher for the secondary school in items C1, 2, and 3.
Before that seconded, did I hear you add the administrative job position?
Yes, I believe I did.
Okay.
I did skip that. Sorry, and I will also recommend the approval for the administrative job description for the intermediate school assistant principal. Thank you, Tom.
Second.
There's a motion to approve the items contained in your agenda at 11.2.1.2 and the subsequent subparagraphs of those, and it's been seconded. Is there any discussion?
I have one question. I was about ready to ask it when we started the actual meeting. When I saw the secondary intervention / credit recovery teacher, I was thinking federal funds, COVID, ESSER, and so forth. Is there a relationship between this position and federal funds, and could we make that a relationship? Ann Corwell, you out there?
I am here. There is not a relationship with that. Generally, with federal funding, it is more of students involved with title or ESL instruction. So I don't think this would be a federal position at this point. This is a general position, and it's just replacing the alternative ed position from before.
I wasn't thinking the titles as much as I was the COVID money for credit recovery, regaining, like we're having summer school, like we're having different things to have kids catch up.
What we could do with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Shelley, I think for maybe some training purposes or supplies that person could utilize, that's a possibility. However, since it's a position that's going on every year, we wouldn't be able to use that money yearly.
I'll use my own mantra. It's a recurring cost with 1 or 2 year funds, but again, with 1 or 2 years is important too.
Correct, right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, I am going to take items 5B1 and 5B2 together. So I'd like to recommend the approval of the ESS Northeast substitute listing. There are several individuals noted in 5B.1 in the substitute listing A through E. And then would also like to recommend the approval for the ESS support staff listing as noted in 5B2A through G.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to approve the substitute teachers listed in your agenda at section 11.2.5B1 and 2, and it's been seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take 6A, B, and 7A and B together. So I'd like to recommend the approval for the job descriptions for the color guard instructor and drumline percussion instructor as noted in your attachments. And then would also like to recommend the approval to post and advertise for those respective positions, the color guard instructor and drumline percussion instructor.
Second.
The motion before the board to approve the items listed in your agenda at 11.2.6 and .7. It's been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Ratowski. We go on to property, Mr. Holowach.
I will submit and recommend for approval to the board, paying the Arndsville Borough Bill invoice number 031521 UA in the amount of $13,390.80 for the November 2019 relocation of full Conewago Street water line for stormwater work as per the attached documents in Agenda Manager.
A second.
There is a motion for the board to approve the Arndsville invoice listed in your agenda at 11.3, and it's been seconded. Any discussion?
Yes, I put out in front of you on your tables and so forth, 3 items. The first is the, getting a lot of feedback. The first is the August 6th memo from Dr. Dahl. Some of you weren't on the board at that time, but it regarded the how we got into this agreement. And basically it was projected to cost $15,000 to $20,000 to fix up the swale that is across the Conewago Street and so forth there in Arndsville, as well as the Full Street crossing, I'll call it, where we actually have two culverts or inverts, they call them. I call them culverts. And if you look, hold this paper upright like this, put the Crabtree roller ball at the bottom, you have 2 sheets. One is the way it was prior to construction, and the other one is all of the civil engineering, if you will, water, storm retention and so forth that we have. And as you can see, a lot of it culminates down in that lower left-hand corner. And if you look real close at the very corner, there is a small invert with a pipe going across the street, which is Full Street, and goes across the street off of our property onto another invert. And from what I can determine, that was a 12-inch pipe. And as the letter states, the borough is having problems with those 2 inverts and having problems with our swale. And I know that personally. I go to church in Arndsville, and I went to church shortly after the project started. And a lady came up to me and said, "Ron, I'll be so glad when the district gets this project done." I said, "Why is that?" "My basement's flooding." I said, "Well, I'm sorry if our construction is causing your basement to flood." She said, "Oh, no. It's been flooding for years. So it's been a problem." And I had no problem. I don't think President Wilson did, and any of those that attended that meeting with K&W and all the parties involved. And it was estimated at $15,000 to $20,000 to do both of those, the swale and the Full Street project there. So again, this will never show up as a bill. Basically, it was done, it was put out to bid, and it came in as a base bid, so we'll never know what really did cost us in dollars, but it was estimated 15 to 20. So if you want to be generous, 10,000 for the one, 10,000 for the other, however you want to break it down. So that was our attempt at being a good neighbor and fixing up a problem that we knew existed there in Arndsville. So you can see all of the water ponds, water gardens, I guess they're called, retention ponds and so forth. And the purpose of those is that it retains the water so that we are putting no more into Arndsville's stormwater system than what we previously were. Now, the problem arose right before Thanksgiving of 2019. I'll never forget the day they came in. They were down there working while we were having our construction meeting and said, we got a problem. We cannot get the 15-inch pipe that was proposed along with the two 15-inch inverts on each end across there. There was a gas line, of course, Columbia Gas's gas line, which was estimated to be $40,000 to move that. There was a water line, which was Arnsville Borough's water line. And the 12-inch pipe just fit between those two. And had the gas company been really nasty about it, I think they required something like a foot or 2 foot of clearance, which was no way it was going to happen. They initially said, as long as you can get the pipe through, we're good. They called back 5 minutes later and said, we're sending somebody down. They sent someone down. They looked at it, they analyzed the problem and said, okay, you can't get a 15-inch pipe through there. We'll approve 2 12s. Well, our culverts on the other side, we didn't have 12-inch pipes. We had a 15-inch pipe with 15-inch culverts, inverts. So immediately, Jeff Schick ordered 2 12-inch culverts or inverts. And that was basically the way the meeting left and so forth. It was going to be a couple months before they were delivered. Over the Thanksgiving holiday, and that's what this bill is, the borough unilaterally decided that they were going to move that pipeline, that water line. And we went to a meeting in January and they said, well, we have a over $13,000 bill for you. Well, no one authorized a $13,000 bill. And, well, we wanted to be proactive. I said, I have no problem with you being proactive. I just don't mind I do mind getting handed the bill though. I'm never convinced, I haven't been convinced yet, and I don't think I ever will be, that for us to move their water line under their street to improve their stormwater system is our responsibility. Yes, we were being a good neighbor and we decided to try to fix something. We had the equipment and so forth there. We ended up opening up that street 2-3 times. And I have a bill here from Lovar that's witness to that. We paid this bill back in whenever. It was back a while back for $23,000. That's in addition to the 15 to 20 that we originally agreed to. That's in addition to all of the borough engineering fees, the K&W engineering fees, our attorney fees for legal advice, their attorney fees for legal advice. We got all of those bills for this full street project. And now here tonight, we're expected to pay another $13,000 for them to move their water line so that we could do their bidding in improving their stormwater. So at this point, I am not convinced it is our bill to pay. And second of all, from what we got, there is no way I could approve this, even if I wanted to, because you look down across the bill itself, they have LB Water. I'm assuming that's one of their subcontractors. I'm assuming they got an itemized bill for it. We didn't. I have no idea what $4,296 in supplies are. And as a board member looking out for taxpayer dollars, I am hesitant to pay that. There's another one there from LB Water for supplies. Another one, LB Water for supplies, nothing itemized. Baumgartner's Mechanical and so forth, replace the water main, $3,000. I'm assuming that's digging and so forth. The next one is a little more, well, it's actually replace the water main. We put a water main, we have a lot of things here. We have overtime for their employees. We have overtime taxes and so forth. I don't think any of us have enough information to pay this bill at this time. And I would move that we table that bill, table the action on that bill.
Can I second his motion?
There's a motion on the floor to table the previous motion to pay the Arnsville Borough invoice. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. The previous motion is tabled.
I did have a question about that bill. There were some dates there.
Wait.
This,
The motion's been tabled.
okay.
There's no further discussion.
James, my recommendation, if you want something clarified, work with Shelley. I'm assuming it'll go back through Shelley as far as any clarification of this bill.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hollabaugh. We move to transportation, Mr. Lady, but there's nothing on the agenda. I beg your pardon? Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I missed it. Yes. You're muted, I think.
Secondly, I would recommend for approval to declare as surplus the following from Biglerville High School. I think this is a book or books, Health for Life, ISBN 0-673-29589-3, copyright 1990. There are 147 copies. I'm guessing textbooks.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to recommend approval to declare surplus of the Health for Life textbooks. This would be item 11-3-2 in your agenda. It's been seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Hollabaugh, and thank you for correcting me there. There's nothing under transportation, so we'll go to curriculum and extracurricular. There's nothing on the agenda in curriculum, and so we go to athletics. Mr. Lady.
Okay, recommend approval for the following individuals as game help for the 2021 spring coach supplemental contracts. You have the list there. So just.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to approve the individuals listed in your agendas for coaches. This would be item 12-2-1, and it's been seconded. Any discussion? And some of these are paid positions, so we'll need a roll call, please.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Hollabaugh,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Rotowski,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Mr. Lady, would you mind doing the other student activities since Mr. Ponce?
Yes. Hold on one second, please. Okay. Item 1, recommend approval of the following memorandum of understanding as per the attached documents. And this would be for the Bendersville Borough Police and the Pennsylvania State Police Department and the Biglerville Borough Police and the Pennsylvania State Police, and then also the Pennsylvania State Police.
Second.
There's a motion before the board to recommend approval of the memorandum of understanding between various police departments as listed in your agenda under item 12.3.1, and it's been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Lady. Mr. Everett, policy.
All right, you have before you the minutes from our policy meeting, and there are 3 first read policies that in a minute I will ask for approval to move to second read status. And then we have 3 second read policies, one of which is scheduled to be rescinded and upon approval would be put into our policy manual. So at this time, I would move that we approve the minutes, move first read to second read, and second read as final approval in our policy manuals.
There's a motion before the board to approve the most recent policy review committee minutes, to approve for first read the policies listed in your agenda, and to approve the second read policies for our policy manual, and it has been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, could I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mr. Hollable,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Otowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. We move to miscellaneous items. You should have received at your desk the ballots for the LIU 12. They list board of directors. They list 3 people, from whom we're supposed to pick 3 for the 3-year terms, and 1 person for an unexpired term. And there's 1 person listed. Dr. Fee, I know you don't have these in front of you, but I will read you the names. Mark Chimmel, Douglas White, and Dustin Martin. We can vote for 3 of them, and the unexpired term, we are to vote for 1, and the 1 person listed is Vanessa Snell. Do I hear a motion to vote for all 3 in the first category and the 1 person in the second category?
Excuse
So
me, Mr.
moved.
Wilson. Excuse me, Mr. Wilson. Each member needs to fill it out and return it back to Candy, please.
Oh, so we don't do a motion here.
Correct.
And
yes.
sign it, right?
That is correct, yes.
All right, I misunderstood. So. I'm not
Mr.
sure how-
Wilson,
Yeah,
this is Candy. Also, Mr. Fee, I will send you your copy to sign and return to me. And I will do the same thing for Mr. Ponce in his absence. I will mail it and have you return it to me.
okay, that was easier than I thought.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to payment of the bills. Do I hear a motion to pay the bills?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Do I hear a second? Did I hear a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay,
Second.
there's a motion
Yeah,
for the
I
board
second
to
it.
pay the bill, and it has been seconded. I noted that Mr. Hallbaugh is receiving payment, and I don't recall seeing your wife's on there.
I am, or my spouse is receiving payment, so I will be abstaining.
All right, as a matter of policy, we ask that people being paid do not vote. However, that's not a requirement. So there's 8 of us tonight, and 2 is still enough to get approval.
I'm pretty sure
So,
we're mispaid.
any discussion on paying the bills? Could I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Kraus,
Yes.
Mr. Everett,
Yes.
Mr. Fee,
Aye.
Mrs. Janzik,
Yes.
Mr. Lady,
Aye.
Mr. Hollable, you're abstaining?
Abstaining.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right. I don't think we have any old business or new business, unless someone has something. Our next committee meetings, curricular, extracurricular, and business and operations, are on the 4th of May in this room. And the next policy committee meeting is the 6th of May, and that will probably be in the boardroom. And the next regular board meeting will be the 18th of May in this room. And we will, very important meeting, we will be approving the preliminary budget at that. Does anyone else have anything?
Mr. Wilson, if I could just remind the board members, if you have not completed your statement of financial interest, please return those to me by May 1st. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, if I could please ask Mr. Lady and Mr. Rakowski to stop by my table. I need your signatures on a couple pieces of, thank you.
Anything else? All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So
Second.
moved.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. We are adjourned.